I'm Tony, and I have progressive supranuclear palsy. Follow me on my journey.
Hi, I'm Barbara, and this is Tony. We're doing these videos to take you through our lives with progressive supranuclear palsy, otherwise known as PSP. You'll hear us say that a lot. So, in the videos, you heard Tony in the beginning, his slurred speech. That is known as dysarthria. He slurs, and a lot of people think that he's been drinking because it sounds like a person who has been drinking, but it's a part of the PSP. We want to take you through and just kind of show you and talk to you about some of the things that we're having to deal with this disease. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our life prior to PSP. Tony and I started off as high school sweethearts, and then we were married after he was in the Air Force. He came back from the schooling and basic and all that, and we got married. We have 4 children, 3 boys and 1 daughter, and then we have a slew of grandchildren. We have been traveled all over the world. We started out in Omaha, Nebraska. Then we ended up in Germany, and then went back to Omaha, and then back to Germany, and then we ended our career in the Air Force in England. Came back stateside, and then we lived in Arkansas for quite a while, about 10, 15 years. And then we moved here to Florida, and we both worked for Disney and just enjoyed ourselves. And now we're living in a retirement community where we are now learning to live with the PSP.
As Barbara has said, I have progressive supranuclear palsy, PSP. PSP is a neurodegenerative disease. Neurodegenerative diseases, some you might know and some you may not, but it is a progressive loss of structure and the function of your brain neurons, including cell death. Many or some of the neurodegenerative diseases you may know include Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and multiple sclerosis. Some of the more rare ones include progressive supranuclear palsy, Lewy body dementia, cortical basal degeneration, and multiple system atrophy. All of these do involve parts of the brain or brain cells dying, and they may die for various reasons. My early journey with PSP began unknown to me in early January of 2016. I experienced my first unexplained backwards fall. I didn't think anything of it because I only fell just the one time. Later, about a month or so later, I had another fall, and then another. In May of 2016, I took my wife to Ireland, and we had a great anniversary vacation. And it was about 2 weeks. During that entire time, I was walking around, riding the buses, walking along the cliffs of Moher, kissing the Blarney Stone up in the top of Blarney Castle. But I had no falls. It was only a 2-week period though, and I was still early in the falls. The falls did slowly start progressing, but they continued through the rest of 2016. In 2017, I started feeling dizzy. I did see the doctor for that, and he kept testing me for various things, but we couldn't get rid of the dizziness. He tested me for Meniere's, another one called BPPV, which is basically rocks in your head. And don't laugh. I don't have any rocks in my head. He tested me for vertigo and inner ear infections and a whole bunch of things. He tried me on several drugs and various therapies, and to this date, which is in 2021, I still have the dizziness. I've become accustomed to it, but when I lay down or rise up, that change in the position is when it is the worst, and I have to lay down for a little bit or sit up for a little bit from that laying down before I can move. Otherwise, I'm going down. But I still fall. In the middle of 2017, I had already noted that I was having some difficulty remembering some things in the immediate use. I later learned another term for that. And when I was experiencing that, the first real uncomfortable time was on a call that I received from a customer, and we had to give a standard spiel when we answered the phone. Only I had already had to go to the point of writing down that standard spiel. I couldn't remember it. And when I got to the customer, I was reading off the spiel, and then I came to a word that I didn't know, that I didn't understand. I didn't know what it meant, didn't know how to pronounce it. That word was Disney. Now, understand, I had already been working for Walt Disney World for 11 years. Previous to that, my wife and I were Disney freaks. We would come down to Florida a lot, a couple of times a year, and spend weeks down here. And we grew up, I took her on dates out in California to Disneyland. And we introduced our children to everything Disney. But I couldn't remember the word Disney. It was disheartening. But still, I didn't say anything until about 2 weeks later, when I had another customer on the phone. And for some reason, I couldn't answer any of their questions. And mind you, I was extremely knowledgeable, and I couldn't bring the thoughts up from my head. I knew what it was, but I couldn't bring it up to my head into the front to get it out of my mouth. And finally, the customer got frustrated and said, "You must be new here." That was really disheartening. I went back to my doctor. He did a really quick test and said that he saw that I was having mild cognitive impairment. He wanted me to go see a neurologist because he started putting it together with the dizziness and I had mentioned the falls to him. We never discussed the direction of the falls. So I went to the neurologist. Now, granted, these are the only symptoms that they have for me, and they did several tests. And I never actually saw the neurologist. I only saw the neurological nurse lady. And after all of the tests, including MRI and the thing where they put pins in my head and all the rest of this stuff, they said that they thought that I had multiple sclerosis. And this is important. It was only possible multiple sclerosis because my MRI did not show the multiple sclerosis brain lesions that a person with that gets. They wanted to watch it over a period of time. Now, I will come back to that multiple sclerosis in a little bit. During the next year, I started into 2018, middle of 2018, I started getting the feeling that I had to retire. I was losing more words. My speech was starting to slow down, but it hadn't started slurring yet. And just to let you know, right now I'm shouting, which is a trick I learned later, because my voice has started to get much quieter as well. There were some other changes. My handwriting, which was always bad, started to become teeny tiny to where I couldn't read it and nobody could read it. It was basically like a bunch of squiggles. And I noted that in that time that I was having, because I like to read, I was having to hold a book up in order to read, and my arms of course would get tired. And but I also noticed that when I was reading, I couldn't go down to the next line. I would really have to move the book up in order to force myself into the next line of the book. I didn't tell the doc about that until later. I told my second neurologist. So while we're waiting into 2018, my wife and I had a talk, and we thought it was best if I medically retired myself. I was eligible for retirement. So I waited for a few days after I turned 60, and I retired. I immediately, because I have some other issues which we won't discuss here, but I immediately knew that I was going to have to try for a disability. But I needed to gather the information, and I needed to also maintain medical care. I'm a veteran, as Barbara has said, so I started going to the VA. In late 2018, I started slurring my speech. This would be in November, December time frame. In February of 2019, all I did was go get a prescription refill for my glasses, get eyes checked and stuff. And the doc there, the optometrist that was looking at how my eyes had changed, he noted something, and then he did some tests, including moving things up and down, and noted that my eyes didn't move all the way up, and definitely it didn't move all the way down. He asked about stairs, and I said, well, I've been losing track of stairs for a while, and like a curb, in order to step off of a curb, I would turn sideways so I could see further out to see where the curb line was, and then I would step over the curb, turn around, and walk. And he noted that, and then he did some tests about my eye movement, and I couldn't follow his fingers. You see, I'm doing my fingers in a jerky motion, and that's how my eyes follow. They I can't even follow my own fingers, and I can only see to here. The peripheral vision is almost all gone. It's about a 45 degrees on either side is where I can start to see stuff. He suggested seeing another neurologist, as the VA now had that I have possible multiple sclerosis, and they were waiting, like the other doc. They sent me to a multiple sclerosis specialist. The first time I met this guy, Dr. Daniel Jacobs, he isn't part of the VA. The VA had sent me out of the VA system to him. He is a multiple sclerosis specialist and movement disorder specialist, but they're focusing on multiple sclerosis. He had our 30-minute meet you doc thing, and he did a few tests in that 30 minutes and wanted to expand it. We were over an hour and a half in our 30-minute meeting with him. He did all sorts of things. A more comprehensive cognitive thing, which I messed up a lot on. Some things actually brought out something else that I hadn't thought about, but that is what's called pseudobulbar effect, or basically, and you'll hear me say that more often because it is easier to say, that is emotional lability, not liability, lability, L-A-B. But anyway, that just means that I will laugh and cry at in opportune times when it's not normally needed. And it's gotten worse since, but I started crying in his office. I fell back into the chair, almost fell over. He had to help me up. He did the little pull test, and I was gone if he hadn't been there. I was on the floor. And he, of course, retested the vision that the doc said, and said that he thought that it was one of several things. And at that moment, he said that he was going to lump it under cerebellar ataxia. And we had never heard of that. I knew that there was a cerebellum in your head. I didn't know where it was or what it did. But we went and looked it up afterwards. But he had ordered a whole bunch of more tests, including looking for things genetic and thyroid, vitamin, just a whole bunch of things. And it was 29 vials of blood, another MRI, and another thing with the wires in my head. And on our third trip, or on our second trip, he asked me a question that nobody else had ever asked. He said, when you fall, you tend to fall forwards or backwards? And I was like, I fall backwards most of the time. Very rarely do I fall forwards. It's not like I stumble. I just gone. And that was of note. I didn't know that. Docs would always just say, do you experience falls? They never asked if I fall backwards. But I do fall backwards. On our second, he mentioned that it wasn't. Well, on the first, he said it's definitely not multiple sclerosis. Right. On the second, he said it wasn't cerebellar ataxia, and it wasn't a bunch of these genetic or thyroid or whatever. He had limited it down to something called, that I had never heard of, multiple system atrophy, which is where he was leaning initially, and the other one called progressive supranuclear palsy, and that one was a mouthful. we looked it up, and of course when we looked it up we misspelled it, and we even put in PSP, and the only thing that came up was PlayStation Plus, and we knew that wasn't right. And on the third visit is when he said that he felt that I had probable PSP. The reason he said probable is because the only way to know for certain is through autopsy at the end of my life. And I wasn't ready for them to do that to confirm that it was PSP. I thought I'd want to live for a little bit longer, right?
A little bit longer, yes. Please.
And, so we started looking up that. I found support groups online and things like this. Now, this was still in 2019. In 2019, before I saw the neurologist, I had already started experiencing gait freezing, and he noted that in that hour and a half, the gait freezing, my feet would just quit working. Gait freezing did lead to a few falls that were forward, but that's because my feet would quit working. They would just stop, and I would, of course, continue. I'm not exactly, svelte, but so momentum would help with that forward falls in those cases. I've since learned when I gait freeze, and that is basically when I'm trying to do more than one thing. If I want to stand up and walk right from here, my feet will freeze, because that's two things. I can stand up, but once I'm standing, I have to wait a second or so to switch my brain to move forward. If I am already walking and I turn, whether it's my head, my body, or anything else, my feet freeze. So that is something that we've tried to learn to adapt to. I'm currently in a mobility scooter. In order to get in and out of the mobility scooter, I have to turn sideways to get into it, or turn to get out of it. So I'm doing a lot of pauses. When I am out and about, I wear a gait belt, and this woman here uses these hands as help hold me up, because my feet will quit working, and she knows that I'm going to go down if she doesn't hold me up. So I wear a gait belt. That was all still in 2019. There's other symptoms, and they've just been getting worse over time. But that is the nature of the disease. The very first word says progressive, and that's where we're at now. In future videos, we'll talk more about the symptoms that people can expect, length of life, about the symptoms, and how she manages as my caregiver, and she will give some hints. And we will talk about that. And we'll talk about some things that will be fairly hard to discuss without one or both of us getting emotional, mostly me. So we'll do that for future videos.
Stay with us as we continue our journey in the next video with some tough talk about PSP. Thanks for watching.